Probably 17%. Probably low.
You're close. 70% of people are drinking blends. You know, so and you look at shelves and you look at back bars,
Mm,
a lot of folks are given the space to single malt whiskeys,
mm.
and there's different variants from three brands. And the reality is what consumers really want is they're clearly shopping for blends, but they want premium. They do want value and they want premium. And that is when you look at a brand like Dewar's, what we really have started to show up with, and you look at, say, our Dewar's 12 year, we relaunched that in 22.
Yeah.
And this is a finished whiskey now. But, I know you're a bourbon lover. We actually finish this whiskey in first fill unrinsed bourbon casks, and we source them from Angel's Envy. And so this whiskey has,
Is that
I'll
on the
tell you,
bottle?
but no, no, that's not on the bottom. It says double aged in first fill bourbon cask. Now, double
Yeah.
aging is our way of paying homage to a process that we pioneered, but it is a finishing process. These are unrinsed, literally disgorged Angel's Envy bourbon. We take them, we fill it with Dewar's 12. Now, if I could brag about it from a objective credibility, and I think a lot of folks out there, your listeners, I'm sure, are aware of how you get awards in whiskey. Blind tastings. They don't. It's not branded. There's no obnoxious ambassador selling you the stuff. And Whiskey Advocate, which is what I refer to as the JD Power and Associates of spirits ratings.
I have whiskey advocate. There's like seven on my shelf right now.
Yeah, they literally are. I mean, they're one of the most credible rating sources.
Yeah.
And in 22, they do their top 20 whiskeys.
Hmm.
And this whiskey got the number four spot. A $35 bottle of 12-year whiskey got the number four spot, competing with, many, many other whiskeys that are much older and much more expensive. And I think that goes to show that, when you let your palate aside, some of this stuff, to our point we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
these underrated things, and they gave it a 94-point rating, which is, it's higher rated than the usual suspects that I won't
Mhm.
mention, whether it's malt or blends at 12 years. And so what all I love about that product too is, not only is it now finished, it's got this bigger, broader depth of, insert bourbon character. It
Mhm.
really bridges the gap between American whiskey and Scotch. I think a lot of people always think Scotch is peated or smoky,
Yeah.
medicinal, hospital corridors, band-aids. Our whiskeys are
Hospital corridors is the first I've heard that one. I've heard band-aids, but hospital corridors, yeah, that's hilarious.
I'll tell you a story about those tasting notes in a second, but we generally source our whiskeys from the Highland and Speyside region, which are known for orchard fruits, apples, oranges, raisins, pears, stone fruits, a lot of sherry-driven character as well, vanilla and then honey characteristics. So we,
Yeah.
with Dewar's 12, you put that in a Angel's Envy cast and you finish that. Now you've plussed up all that sweetness in it. So if you're a bourbon drinker and you're saying, okay, look, Gabe, you got me. I'm gonna try some Dewar's whiskey and I'm gonna try that 12 year. If you're a bourbon drinker, I'll bet that you're gonna be like, you would probably, if you were honest with me, you'd be like, damn, I didn't know I was a Scotch drinker. Because these are the whiskeys that bridge that gap so well. Still nuance, a lot of complexity, up to 30 different whiskeys in there. But you've got a whiskey now that really bridges that gap well. In the tasting note thing that I wanted to bring up is there's this great whiskey writer, Charlie McLean, and Charlie is really the voice of Scotch from when I started in the industry. And was lucky enough to have dinner with him, and he we went to this place called Vintner's Rooms, which is no longer around. It's in Edinburgh, but you walk downstairs and it looks like if a cool vampire had a best whiskey collection you've ever seen. This place was just a dungeon, and I was
Mm.
sitting in this candlelit space with one of the best whiskey writers, him and Dave Broom. I mean, shout out Dave Broom. He's also like probably my favorite modern whiskey writer. But Charlie's a storyteller. Everything he says is, Scottish accent just oozes story, and he has you listen up to everything he says. But he hands me all these whiskeys. We tried, Ardbegs from the 60s and all these different malts, Aberfeldies from and all our other distilleries, Kergellicky, Altmore, Brackla. And his tasting notes, which I had yet to really wrap my head around, because nosing a whiskey is so difficult at first to put your finger. It's like, whoa, it smells familiar. That's like how you start, right? This smells familiar. There's something here. I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah.
But Charlie would hand me a whiskey. I remember this one in particular was like an Ardbeg, and Ardbeg's phenol count is so high. This stuff is super peated. And he goes, burnt tires. I smell this and I was like, holy shit, that's burnt tires. That says now, and I was like, now, Charlie, why would somebody want to drink it? And he's like, you'll see. And he's right. Like down the road, you get this palate for it. You know,
Mhm.
these things are like salty and briny and smoky. It's like you want to eat barbecue with them sometimes. But then he'd try another whiskey. I forget which one it was. It might have been one of our old blends. And sometimes you get leather in whiskey. You know, you get
Mm.
like this kind of leathery note. And he said 66 Mustang Fastback. And I was like, all right, now you're speaking my language. You know, I'm a Midwesterner. I like old trucks, you know, and things like that. And I think what he showed me is that whiskey tasting notes, while they're interesting to help ground somebody in what it is that they can start thinking about,
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be a thing. You know, it can be a time. It can be, let's say, it reminded you of a dish that your grandmother or mom or somebody cooked, the smell of a home once, or the backyard, fresh cut grass. You know,
Yeah.
these types of things. And Dave Broom, this other whiskey writer, that I mentioned earlier, he actually taught me the best way to approach this because when you do tastings, generally speaking, if you were to start saying tasting notes, people will just say, I agree with you, probably because they're afraid to be wrong. But I try to make them, at the end of the day, I tell them there is no wrong answer. Now, I don't want you telling me that any of our whiskeys taste like a gym bag or no smell like a gym. But I think the point is that these are very personal. And Dave Broom said, rather than thinking of a thing, first try to ground yourself in a time of year. Is it
Yeah.
winter? Is it spring? Is it autumn? Is it the middle of summer? These types of ways are so fun to that when you start trying to understand whiskey, it's like throw it all out the window. It's personal to you. When you start writing them down and start revisiting the whiskeys and looking at your notes before is when you start getting good at it. But I also have a hard time with a lot of romance copy in whiskey tastings where it'll be like the sun is setting in the Scottish Highlands and a deer just happens to hop across. Like, what are we talking about here? This sounds like a Bob Ross painting. This isn't whiskey tasting
It's
notes.
Bob Ross. Yeah, but I agree with you. I do like the fact that the whiskey writer kind of spoke to times because I hear all the time like this tastes like stone fruit and cherries and I've always been very candid about I might not have as refined a palate, but I have things that it makes me think of. It might not necessarily
That
be
is
the
the
exact,
refined palate.
yeah, but I guess in the descriptive nature, it's like I don't know that I could discern necessarily what when they say baking spices. I could taste cinnamon. I don't know every baking spice you're referring to. I don't know. Are
Right.
you talking about cardamom? Are we talking star anise? What are we talking? I remember I taste cinnamon here, but I could honestly tell you that there are times when I've had something that it reminds me of like a feeling or summer or like someone's one time someone said something that resonated with me.